Many of you are aware that I am purposely demonetizing my uploads for the month of April. I have decided on a name. I'm going to be calling this Anti-Authoritarianism April. All A's. Triple A. I actually used to be a double A before I got married. Anyway, this story is pretty much a reflection of our theme for the month, but it's a little bit awkward because one of the sites that I am sending people to support my work is actually at the center of this particular video, and that is Patreon. There are links in the description for places you can get exclusive content. I am clipping a lot of the ends of my live streams during April and putting them up on Patreon and my locals page. I will say this story is going to perhaps concern some of you that Patreon is the place to be for creators. I think we already probably are aware there have been other creators that have been booted from Patreon. This, I think, is a step even farther because this particular content wasn't even posted on Patreon, and yet they still took action against Whitney Webb. However, there is a link for locals, which I know is not going to boot me off, and so you can go support me there. It's free, actually, unless you want to comment and like and post stuff. It's free to just get my content, though every once in a while I post exclusive for subscribers, but for the most part a lot of my stuff is free. So the link's in the description. Head over to locals, or if you want to after this, go to Patreon. I know this is not going to be the best commercial for Patreon, and here's why. This is Whitney Webb's Twitter thread about what happened to her. She's an independent journalist, if you're not familiar, and she does a lot of work that would definitely be considered controversial by mainstream corporate news. And by controversial, I mean factual. So what basically happened was that she wrote an article on her own website, and Patreon decided to take action on her account because, according to this email I'm going to show you, it would potentially dissuade people from getting the COVID-19 vaccine. I will link all of this in the description if you would like to read it for yourself, because I'm not going to read you her entire article. I am going to read you a couple paragraphs from it so you can see, but ultimately this really isn't even about what's in her article. At the end of the day, everybody's going to have a subjective line in the sand about what is too much for somebody to be doing. So really the big picture here is understanding a little bit more about how these corporations are making their decisions and seeing the fact that they're not even now taking action against somebody's content on their own sites, but they're seeing content on other sites. If it in any way has any link to them, they're taking action by saying that that's a community guideline strike, essentially. So this goes back to March 12th. I just found out about it. I apologize for the tardiness on it, but I thought it was worth still discussing. Whitney writes, heard back from Patreon, and it turns out I am not being deplatformed for medical misinformation. Apparently why the example part of the original email was left blank. But because my reports might dissuade my audience from taking preventative measures to fight COVID. So this is what it says. Hi again, Whitney. Thank you for your reply. Not all of your content covering COVID-19 is outside of guidelines. However, some of the content you're sharing on the website linking to your Patreon account, such as the example shared in my previous message, might be dissuading your audience from taking preventative measures to fight the disease. Because this content is being funded through Patreon, it's subject to our guidelines. We kindly ask you to review your website again and remove this type of content. All the best, Blair from Patreon Trust and Safety. So I said earlier was about the vaccine. Now that's what her article is about, but obviously this says more generally speaking, dissuade them from taking preventative measures to fight the disease. So again, I will read you a couple paragraphs of that, but this is how she continues in the thread. In the previous email, I pointedly asked if factually accurate information that is critical of the vaccine was against their community guidelines, and this was their response. The main article of concern is this report written with somebody else. It's developers of Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine tied to UK eugenics movement. Check this out. When you try to open it in a link in a new tab, this is what Twitter shows you. Warning, this link may be unsafe. So it wants to make sure that you understand this. And I think, continue. Okay, so you can get to it. I have it up here twice. So this is it. The sub-headline here, the developers of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine have previously undisclosed ties to the renamed British Eugenics Society, as well as other eugenics-linked institutions like the Wellcome Trust. And the part I'll read you here, they may have been referencing in their concern, is, for instance, mainstream media has had little, if anything, to say about the role of the vaccine developers' private company Vaxitech, if I'm saying that correctly, in the Oxford-AstraZeneca partnership, a company whose main investors include former top Deutsche Bank executives, Silicon Valley behemoth Google, and the UK government. All of them stand to profit from the vaccine alongside the vaccine's two developers, Adrian Hill and Sarah Gilbert, who retain an estimated 10% stake in the company. Another overlooked point is the plan to dramatically alter the current sales model for the vaccine following the initial wave of administration, which would see profits soar, especially if the now obvious push to make COVID-19 vaccination an annual affair for the foreseeable future is made reality. Arguably, most troubling of all is the direct link of the vaccine's lead developers to the Wellcome Trust, and in the case of Adrian Hill, the Galton Institute, two groups with long-standing ties to the UK eugenics movement. The latter organization, named for the father of eugenics, Francis Galton, is the renamed UK Eugenics Society, a group notorious for over a century for its promotion of racist pseudoscience and efforts to improve racial stock by reducing the population of those deemed inferior. Again, a long article. You can read it for yourself. The link will be in the description. Going back to her Twitter thread here, she says, I never shared this article on Patreon, but Patreon demands I delete it from my site to be reinstated. I will not be doing so. The Patreon replacement, i.e. membership option, available directly through my website, will be fully available on Monday. What Patreon is doing here is taking the position that factually accurate information that is critical of vaccine developers and big pharma firms with clear conflicts of interest / horrendous safety track records should be hidden from the public, a truly chilling precedent. This is especially true considering that several national governments have recently moved to suspend the use of the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine over similar concerns expressed in that article, and actually links to an article here from MSN.com. As a last point, the COVID-19 vaccines are not even preventative measures, since even the WHO has said that there is no evidence that they prevent transmission of the disease. Thanks, Patreon, for showing your true colors. So this does not bode well for the fact that Patreon is one of the alternative platforms that I've been telling people to go support me on. And of course, it's not new that Patreon has had its issues. This, however, feels like more aggression, okay? You know, this is definitely an escalation of the cancellation of creators, because this wasn't, as she's saying, something that she even posted there. It's on her own website. So now these companies are going after people for what they're posting on their own websites and saying, well, yeah, but, you're partially funding through us, so it still violates our community guidelines. And really, let's talk about the information and misinformation that has been spread by mainstream corporate news who have suffered no consequences like this. And I have to say, if you are a mainstream corporate news organization that has jumped on the new media platforms bandwagon and you haven't violated a community guideline yet, what are you doing here? Truly, what are you doing here? You are not doing journalism, because there is a community guideline for everything. And if you're doing anything that challenges any narrative, really, of any power structure, you are going to put yourself against the community guidelines. So I'm just saying that, it's obviously just another example of the encroachment of these companies on what we're seeing. And it's sad that there are so many people out there that think there's nothing to show for that. There's no example of this, like, of that there's issues with this or that or whatever it is. Like, that just, people just walk around thinking that if they haven't seen it, it just doesn't exist. But this is a very clear example of the fact that actually there are people making content out there. There are studies that are out there that are just not allowed to be shared. And the fact that you may not be aware of something related to this public health policy issue is nothing to do with the fact that it's not out there. It has everything to do with the fact that you're not allowed to see it. That's the main point I want to make sure that people walk away from this video with, is that A, this is definitely an escalation, because these companies in the past, again, it's like, okay, whatever you're doing over there, fine, just don't do it over here in our sandbox. Now it's like, nah, well, if you're taking any of our sand over to your sandbox, then we have a problem with that. So now they're coming after people for their own website. And as she mentions here, okay, they're talking about, well, yeah, but this could affect people wanting to take preventative measures to stop COVID. And she's like, well, actually, my article detailing this particular vaccine, she shows WHO information I'll go back to it real fast. Right here, this is an article from Business Insider. It's top WHO scientist says vaccinated travelers should still quarantine, citing lack of evidence that COVID-19 vaccines prevent transmission, which basically goes in the face of Patreon saying that it's a preventative measure. And so it's just a mess. And I'm not even here trying to argue for or against Whitney's journalism, really, because you should just be able to go read it for yourself and make your own choice. That's the whole point of this video, is that I wish you would be able to have the opportunity to read what's out there and make a decision for yourself. But as we can see, it's becoming much harder to do so. So anyway, as we continue on with anti-authoritarianism April, and this video is demonetized on YouTube, head over to my locals page. And if you dare, there is a link for Patreon, but let's all be honest, folks, the writing's on the wall. It's not going to be getting any easier over there. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe if you aren't subscribed yet, and I will see you next time.